I'm preaching this Sunday at one of the local Lutheran churches, and instead of the usual pericope, which are the series of texts that liturgical churches within Christendom follow through the church year, they're doing what's called a narrative gospel. They're reading through the Gospels, and this is the text that they've given me, and I want to share part of it anyway, and just a few thoughts about it. So this is from Mark, the 8th chapter, verses 27 and following. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men." And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Just a few thoughts about that text for us today. Jesus is walking along with his disciples, and he has a little pop quiz. And the first one is kind of academic. Who do people say that I am? And all they need to know is kind of what they've heard in the marketplace. What's the gossip? What are people saying? And so they give some of those reports. John the Baptist, or maybe one of the old great religious leaders come back like Moses or Elijah. But then he asks the second question, "But who do you say that I am?" And this is very, very, very different. This is not academic. This isn't even so much a pop quiz. This question is personal, and it is intimate and even ultimate. It's a little bit like, in my experience, shopping with your wife. I don't do that very often, but once in a great while. And we'll go out, and she's looking for jeans. She tries on a new pair of jeans and comes out of the dressing room, turns around and asks you, do these jeans make my butt look big? And you know that there's only one right answer to that question. And if you get it wrong, there are going to be some very negative consequences. This question that Jesus asks is a little bit like that. It is a very personal question. It's asked within a relationship, a really, really important relationship. And there's only one right answer. And if you get it wrong, there are consequences. Well, Peter answers, and he answers correctly. You are the Christ, you are the Messiah. With all of the baggage that's loaded into that for the Jewish people living in first century Palestine. He has the right answer, but he has no idea what he's saying. And that becomes very clear. Jesus begins to outline what that means. The Son of Man must suffer. He's going to die. And Peter takes him aside and says, "Don't say that, Jesus. Don't be so negative. Don't be so pessimistic. That's not my view of who the Christ, the Messiah, is." And so Jesus rebukes Peter in front of the disciples and then calls all of the crowds and begins to elaborate. I was trying to think of an illustration about what it means to get the right answer and be all wrong. And I've told this story before, but it struck me again because we're getting close to going down to Colombia for our yearly mission trip, and so I'm working hard on my Spanish. And I am so terrible at Spanish, and yet I try year after year after year, and I know a few phrases. ¿Dónde está el baños? Where's the bathroom? ¿Cómo está? How are you? Bien, muy bien, I'm good, I'm very good, and so on. I know a few phrases, but I'm very limited. So when people ask me, ¿Hablo español?" I will say, Hablo español muy poquito, very little, or if I'm honest, no hablo español. I don't speak Spanish. But we were down in Costa Rica some years ago, my wife and I and a couple of our kids. My daughter and her boyfriend at that time, now her husband, were working at an orphanage. And we were on the coast in Costa Rica at a lovely little resort. And it was late at night, we had gone to bed, and it was very hot. We had the windows open, and there were no fans, and my wife couldn't sleep, and so she nudged me and simply said, "Would you go to the front desk and see if you can get a fan?" And so I went to the front desk, and there was a man there, and I looked at him. Hablo inglés? No, doesn't speak English. And so I tried to explain the situation. And I said, "La mujer, the woman, mi esposa, my wife, está muy caliente, is very hot." And his eyes got wide, and he turned a little red, and he shook his head at me, and he disappeared in a hurry. Well, I didn't understand until the next day when I found out what I was saying is, "My wife is really sexy, what do you think?" I knew what I was saying, and yet I got it all wrong. Peter knew what he was saying, but he got it all wrong. Jesus, in this lovely little text, calls his followers then and calls us now to understand what it means to be Christian, what it means to call him Christ, or call him Messiah, or call him Lord. Peter thought it meant that he could follow Jesus into a glorious path, that the Messiah, the Christ, would be the one who would lead the Jews against the Romans. He'd be a great political or military leader. And Peter thought that he could ride Jesus' coattails into a wonderful, glorious life, and Jesus says no. Sometimes we call on Jesus just when things are bad, or we think of Jesus as someone who can come into our lives and make things all right again. I don't want to deny the incredible power of Jesus at work in each of our lives, but in this little text, he makes it clear that when we call him Lord, when we call him Messiah or Christ, that what it means is we are called to follow him, and it means to deny yourself and take up your cross. It's not so much something you do, it is an orientation, a way we live our lives. Whether you're a pastor like me, or you're a farmer, or a hairdresser, or a dietitian, or a business person, whatever you're doing, it means to live life with the desire that whenever you can, you give yourself away for the sake of others in need. The cross is where Jesus died to make the world right again, to make God's love and forgiveness available. When we take up our cross to follow Jesus, we are saying we're going to give ourselves for all the people around us who are in desperate need. We, like him, will seek to make a difference in this world around us. Amen.